So we're just entering the fourth chapter of Eruvin. We've been dealing with the Shabbat boundary, and throughout this fourth chapter, we're going to deal with a succession of situations in which people end up either inside or outside the Tuchum, the Shabbat boundary, the 2,000 amot around town, that they can't leave for various reasons. And we'll see some of these are intentional and some of these are unintentional. And they start off actually with the very, very most unintentional. Someone whom Gentiles or an evil spirit, a ruach ra'ah is an evil spirit, someone who these have taken out. That means taken out of the 2,000 amot. Maybe they've been kidnapped, or maybe they had some kind of psychological breakdown and they just wandered. Ein lo eila arba amot. Once you've left the 2,000 amah limit, you can only go 4 amot. You can't travel more than 4 cubits in any direction. There's a famous story about a chassid who arrives at Heathrow during Shabbat. I think his flight is delayed. So unbeknown to him, he actually arrives in the airport during Shabbat. And he says to the people around him, the aircrew, look, I'm sorry, I can't move. I can't move more than 4 amot. And they actually pick him up and carry him off the plane because he won't walk more than 4 amot in the space that he's arrived at, which is outside his 2,000 amot. The Mishnah goes on. So that's what the Mishnah means. Ein lo eila arba amot. A person can occupies, I think, 3 amot square, and then the 1 amah is for them to move, is, if you like, so they can stretch out their hand or something. But the total space occupied by a human person is 4 amot. The time we wait after saying Shmona Esrei is the amount of time it takes us to walk 4 amot before we do anything else. It's as if it's the space we need to exit ourselves. 4 amot is a human space. If they bring him back, it's as if he's never left. In other words, he can come back and he can behave as if he never left. He's still got the 2,000 amot that he left with, although the commentators comment if he came back of his own accord. So maybe he goes out to get something or to see something or to say something. If he comes back of his own accord, he is pinned in a 4 amot square distance. If they brought him back, it is as if he had never gone out. This only applies to someone who was brought back by the Gentiles or brought back by the Ruach Ra'ah. And I can't resist bringing you, I like bringing you the Rambam. He's a doctor. He translates Ruach Ra'ah. He says, Korin lo kol hezek she'eino ba miyad ha'adam. Any damage which a person suffers that doesn't result from another person. So in anything that happens to you that it doesn't result from someone hitting you or beating you, me'ezo siba she'tiyeh, from whatever reason it occurs from, is called ruach ra'ah, is called an evil spirit. And I think this maybe this refers to physical illness as well as psychological illness, although I'm not sure a physical illness would make you walk 2,000 amot. But he certainly got in mind psychological illness when he says this is some kind of damage that might make you leave the 2,000 amah boundary. Maybe they took them to another town. They put him in a cattle pen. I put this as a stable. It's some kind of enclosed area where they put animals. Maybe for horses, it may be for other kinds of cattle. But this is an enclosed area, and we learnt in the preceding Mishnayot that if it's a deer or a sachar, if it's one of these cattle pens or stables, then we can carry in them if providing they're fenced around with a boundary. We learned the halachot of making a boundary, a fence around the deer and the sachar, and we learned actually it can be up to about 50 acres in size. You can have a vast space here that's boundaried off if it's used for animals. Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah omrim, mahalechet kulo. Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, if you're put in one of these big spaces, you can move through the entire area. In other words, you can take advantage of the fact that it's the kind of area that if we fence it off, then we can walk around in it. I think the presumption may be that there is already a boundary sitting there before Shabbat, and we'll come to that presumption in a minute. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva omrim ein lo ela arba amot. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva says, no, maybe their assumption is it's not fenced off, because for them there's only 4 cubits. And now we have a story. The Mishnah loves stories. Ma'aseh shebau mi Prandisia. It happened that they were coming from this place called Prandisia. And my translation, the Mishnah, translates this as Brindisi. Brindisi is actually a port on the eastern side of Italy. And we know that the rabbis went to Rome. So maybe they traveled across Italy from the west to the eastern side and then got on the ship of Brindisi to go back to the land of Israel. Anyway, it once happened they were coming from Brindisi and their ship sailed out to sea. This must mean, by the way, sailing out on Shabbat. This must refer to sailing out on Shabbat. So presumably they boarded the ship before Shabbat. It's absolutely forbidden to, we can't board a ship on Shabbat because we're passing from, the ship itself is a private domain. Rabban Gamliel, the Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, halchu et kula. Rabban Gamliel, the Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah walked over the whole ship, just as they would walk over the whole of the cattle pen. So they assume this is a fenced-off area. And the Bartanura actually, the Bartanura actually says, they kind of made Shabbat in the empty space with partitions while it was still daylight. In other words, we're talking about a ship which is effectively a partition space before Shabbat comes in. So Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah are going to walk around the whole area. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva lo zazu me'arba amot. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva didn't move beyond their 4 square cubits. Shiratzu lachmir al atzman, because they wanted to be stringent on themselves. It looks as if they were trying to make a point, perhaps about the case of the cattle pen and the stable, because the case of the ship seems to be different. It's clearly fenced off. You can clearly walk around a ship. It's Reshut HaYachid. But it seems they wanted to be stringent on themselves just to make the point about the cattle pen and the stable. And the halakha, by the way, goes according to Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Now the Mishnah then continues with these stories about the journey. Once they didn't enter the harbor until dark. And this clearly, again, is talking about Erev Shabbat. So they're sailing through the week. And it just happens that when they get to the port, it's dark is just coming in. Amrulo Rabban Gamliel. They asked Rabban Gamliel, Ma'anu le'red. They asked Rabban Gamliel, can we disembark? Amar lahem. He said to them, Mutaratem, you are permitted. Shekvar hayiti mistakel, because I was already observing. V'hayinu v'toch hatchum ad shelo chashecha, and we were already within the Shabbat limits before dark. So Rabban Gamliel seems to be makil here, but he seems to be saying, look, I knew we were within 2,000 amot before dark. And we might wonder, by the way, how does he know? How does he know that we're within the Shabbat limits before dark? And the Bartanura has an absolutely fascinating comment, which I presume he takes from the Talmud. And it's a comment about the technology in use of the Talmud. Shehayiti mistakel, I was already observing. And the Bartanura says, B'shaf shoret shel kaneh chalul. Using a tube perforated, read, Shehaita mutukenet le midat Sfiat alpaim ama, that was already designed or set up for the measurement of viewing 2,000 cubits. It seems to be some kind of early 2000-year-old rangefinder, a bit like a rangefinder that looks through two angles that you can get on a modern, well, a 20th century camera anyway. Seems to be some kind of technology like the kind of rangefinders they used in last century cameras in order to estimate distance. So he says, Mutara tem shekvar hayiti mistakel hayinu b'toch hatchum ad shelo chashera. I knew, I was observing, I was actually measuring the distance, and we were already within the Shabbat limit before dark. Now, what about someone who, rather than being transported beyond the Shabbat limit by Gentiles or by a bad dream or a psychological illness or by maybe Gentiles manning a ship, by the way? Remember that there are Gentiles running the ship. What about someone who has a mitzvah? Mishiyatsa birushut, someone who went beyond Shabbat limit with permission. This refers to permission of the Bet Din. So maybe permission to give evidence, permission to do some other kind of mitzvah, maybe permission to defend the city. Ve'amrulo, and they said to him, Kvar na'aseh maseh, kvar na'asa maseh. The act has already been performed, i.e., they said to him, look, there's no need to go out anymore, you can come back. So he's outside the Shabbat limit. Yeshlo alpaim amal choruach. He can go 2,000 amot in any direction. This is a problem, by the way. I mean, I don't. This seems to be. I mean, this is interpreted by the commentators as a way of being lenient, and I suppose it's more lenient than trapping the poor guy within 4 amot. But I'm not quite sure what he's going to do out in the desert if he's 2,000. He's more than 2,000 amot away from town, and he can only move 2,000 amot in any direction. And the Mishnah continues, if he was within the tchum, that's a great situation to be. It's as if he had never gone out. Anyone who goes out to save life can return to their original place. And we can compare actually the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah. This halacha that if someone goes out to save life, we're lenient in order so he can come back, because otherwise people aren't going to go out. People aren't going to go out to do a mitzvah if they can't get back. And sure enough, in the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah, there's a story about witnesses coming for the new moon, and the witnesses were allowed to break Shabbat in order to give evidence. It once happened, about 40 pairs of witnesses were passing, and Rabbi Akiva actually stopped them in Lud because he didn't think the court would need so many witnesses. Shalach lo Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel sent to him, Im akev ata et harabim, if you detain the many, nimtseit machshilan le'atid lavo, you will cause them to not come in the future. Sometimes we do things in the present which are a little bit lenient because we need to encourage people to do the right thing in the future. And this idea that anyone who goes out to do a mitzvah can come back to their original place, that's a classic example.